"You're going to regret this," said the street girl to the prosecutor. Years later, Jessica Miller was sobbing in the defendant's seat while Prosecutor Michael Thompson displayed a triumphant smile. The 19-year-old girl, wearing the orange detention uniform, had just been convicted of a theft she didn't commit. It was then that she stood up forcefully, pointed her trembling finger at the man in the impeccable suit, and shouted with all the anger in her chest, "You're going to regret this! I swear you're going to regret this!" The prosecutor just laughed disdainfully, adjusting his expensive tie as she was led away by the guards. For him, it was just another victory in his perfect conviction record. One more case bringing him closer to the promotion he so desired. Jessica had lived on the streets of Chicago since she was 15, when she ran away from home to escape her violent stepfather. She had been accused of stealing food from a small market in the Chinatown neighborhood, but the security cameras that could prove her innocence had mysteriously disappeared before the trial. Throughout the hearing, she tried to explain that she was only helping Mrs. Margaret, a 70-year-old lady who had fallen on the sidewalk in front of the establishment. When the security guards arrived, she was kneeling beside the elderly woman, holding a shopping bag that had spilled onto the ground. "I was just helping her pick up her things," protested Jessica for the 100th time. But Prosecutor Michael had other plans. He needed to maintain his spotless conviction record to get the state attorney position being contested by 3 candidates. Every case won was one step closer to his dream job. "Your Honor," Michael said to the judge in a solemn voice, "this young woman represents a threat to public order. Her life on the streets is proof enough of her questionable character. We cannot allow criminals to be rewarded with impunity." The public defender, overwhelmed with dozens of cases, had barely prepared the defense. He asked basic questions and failed to properly challenge the inconsistencies in the prosecution's version. The conviction came quickly, 2 years in a closed facility. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. In the Riverdale Women's Prison, Jessica discovered something that would change her life forever. She was pregnant. The father was Tyler, a 20-year-old boy she had met during her last months on the streets. He had disappeared shortly before her arrest, leaving only a promise that he would come back for her. Pregnancy in prison was a nightmare. The other inmates saw her as weak and naive. Sharon, a 40-year-old woman serving time for fraud, was the only one who approached her. "Girl, you need to learn to defend yourself in here," Sharon said one night, sitting on the bed next to Jessica's. "But first tell me the truth. Did you really do what they say you did?" "I swear I didn't," replied Jessica, stroking her growing belly. "I was just helping an elderly lady." Sharon studied the young woman's face for long seconds before nodding. "I believe you, and I'll help you survive here until your baby is born." The following months were the hardest of Jessica's life. Medical checkups were rare and inadequate. She spent sleepless nights talking to the baby in her belly, promising that she would find a way to give him a better life. When labor began, she was taken to the nearest public hospital, handcuffed and escorted. The delivery was complicated, but finally she held a healthy boy with dark eyes like hers in her arms. "What will you name him?" asked the nurse. "Ethan," whispered Jessica, kissing her son's forehead. "Ethan Miller." But the joy lasted only 3 days. The social worker arrived with papers in hand and a forced smile on her face. "Jessica, you know you can't raise a child in prison. We found a wonderful family who wants to adopt Ethan." "No!" she screamed, clutching the baby to her chest. "He's my son! You can't take him from me!" "It's for the child's own good," insisted the social worker, reaching out her arms. "You still have over a year left to serve. When you get out, you can try to have other children." They tore Ethan from Jessica's arms as she screamed and cried. It was the first time she truly thought about giving up on everything, but the memory of the words she had shouted to the prosecutor kept her alive. "You're going to regret this." The social worker responsible for Jessica's case was Patricia Wilson, a 50-year-old woman who had dedicated 25 years of her life helping at-risk families. She felt uneasy about the whole situation involving Ethan. Patricia decided to investigate Jessica's original case more thoroughly. She sought out Mrs. Margaret, the elderly woman who was being helped on the day of the alleged theft. The conversation took place in the small living room of the woman's home in the Chinatown neighborhood. "Mrs. Margaret, do you remember what happened that day at the market?" asked Patricia, sitting on a plastic chair. The elderly woman, with grey hair tied in a bun, shook her head sadly. "Of course I remember, dear. I slipped on some banana peels someone had thrown on the sidewalk. I fell hard, scattered all my groceries. The poor girl came running to help me. She was gathering my things into the bag when those men arrived shouting." "Are you sure she didn't take anything?" "Yes, I am," replied Mrs. Margaret firmly. "In fact, after she was taken away, some of my groceries were missing. I think some opportunist took them during the commotion." Patricia felt a tightness in her chest. That young woman had been unjustly convicted, lost her son, and she had been an accomplice to it all without knowing. She decided to investigate more deeply. She returned to the market and spoke with long-time employees. One of the baggers, an older man named Old Jim, told her something that shocked her. That girl didn't steal anything. It was Bobby, the owner's son, who stole. He owed money to some guys and took some products to sell, but his father thought it better to blame the homeless girl. Patricia sought out the market owner, Mr. Wong, a man of Japanese origin who had built the business over 30 years. "Mr. Wong, I need to talk about the case of that young woman who was convicted of theft at your establishment." The man became visibly nervous, fidgeting with his hands as he spoke. "Ah, yes, case closed. Justice was served. But your employee told me it was your son who took the products." Mr. Wong sighed heavily before sitting down behind the counter. "My son had gambling problems, owed a lot of money. When I discovered he was taking products from the stockroom, it was too late. The girl was there at the wrong time. I didn't know she was truly innocent. I thought it was just another attempted theft." "Why didn't you tell the truth?" "Because the prosecutor said if I confirmed his version, he wouldn't investigate the tax irregularities at my establishment. I was afraid of losing everything I'd built." Patricia was horrified. She decided to approach Prosecutor Michael to tell him what she'd discovered, but when she arrived at the courthouse, she learned he had been transferred to another jurisdiction. Jessica's case had been closed, and reopening it would be extremely difficult. Even so, Patricia tried to reverse Ethan's adoption, but ran into a mountain of bureaucracy. The adoptive family had moved to another city, and the parents had political connections that made any questioning very complicated. When Jessica was released after serving the 2 years, Patricia was waiting for her at the prison gate. "Jessica, I know it won't help much, but I need to tell you the truth about your case." The two sat on a bench in the square in front of the prison, and Patricia told her everything she had discovered. Jessica listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. "Where is my son?" was the first question she asked. "That will be more difficult. The family that adopted him moved to the countryside. They have the resources to hire good lawyers, but I promise I will help you find him." Jessica left prison at 21, with no home, no family, no son, and no prospects. Patricia helped her get a spot in a temporary shelter and a job as a cleaner in a commercial building in downtown Chicago. Every night, after finishing the cleaning, Jessica would go up to the building's rooftop and look at the city lights. She thought about the son she had never known, the prosecutor who had destroyed her life, and the promise she had made. "You will regret this," she repeated softly, like a mantra that kept her alive. It was during one of those nights that she made a decision that would change everything. She would study law. If the system had been used against her, she would learn to use the system to her advantage. Deborah Johnson was a 65-year-old businesswoman who had built an empire in the cleaning and maintenance industry. A widow for 10 years, she dedicated part of her time to social projects, especially for young people in vulnerable situations. It was Christmas Eve when Deborah decided to work late in her office. She was organizing the documents for the year-end donations when she noticed the young woman cleaning the rooms around her. Unlike the other employees who did the job quickly and left, this girl took care of every detail. "What's your name?" Deborah asked when Jessica entered her room. "Jessica Miller, Mom." "How long have you worked here?" 3 months. Deborah noticed that the young woman carried a stack of books along with the cleaning supplies. Do you study? I'm finishing high school online, Jessica replied, without stopping organizing the paper trays. I want to take the entrance exam for law school. Something in that young woman's determination touched Deborah deeply. She remembered herself at 20, when she worked as a maid during the day and studied at night to become an executive secretary. Sit here for a moment, Deborah said, pointing to a chair in front of her desk. Jessica hesitated, but obeyed. Deborah studied the young woman's face, noticing the small scar above her left eyebrow and the eyes that held too much suffering for someone so young. Tell me your story. And Jessica told her. She talked about her difficult childhood, life on the streets, the unjust conviction, the son she had lost. She hid nothing, because she had learned that lies only made things more complicated. When she finished, Deborah's eyes were moist. How old are you? 21. And you really want to study law? It's the only thing keeping me alive, ma'am. I want to help people like me. And I want... She hesitated. Want what? I want that prosecutor to pay for what he did to me. Deborah nodded slowly. She knew that thirst for justice, that determination forged in pain. Listen, Jessica. My company has a scholarship program for employees who want to study. If you pass the entrance exam, I will pay for your college. In return, you continue working here part-time. Jessica couldn't believe what she was hearing. You would do that for me? Yes, but on one condition. You have to promise me that you won't use what you learn just for revenge. Justice and revenge are different things. Jessica agreed, but in her heart, she knew the line between the two wasn't so clear. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. Over the next 2 years, Jessica lived a routine that tested all her limits. She woke up at 5 in the morning, worked at Deborah's company from 6 until noon, ate lunch in a hurry, and went to law school in the afternoon. At night, she returned to the small room Deborah had rented for her and studied until late. Her classmates mostly came from wealthy families. At first, many looked at her strangely, but they soon came to respect her for her dedication and excellent grades. The professor who impressed her the most was Professor Robert Williams, a 60-year-old criminal defense attorney who taught criminal law. He had a habit of telling real cases to illustrate the subject, and he always emphasized the importance of the search for truth. The law is a powerful tool, he said during one of his classes, but like any tool, it can be used to build or to destroy. What defines that is the character of the one who wields it. Jessica absorbed every word. She was in her 3rd year of the course when she decided to approach Professor Robert after a class on judicial errors. Professor, I'd like to talk to you about a case. Of course, Jessica, what is it about? It's a personal case, an unfair conviction. Robert invited her to his office the following week. There, she told him her whole story, showing the few documents she had managed to keep. The professor listened attentively, making occasional notes. Jessica, technically, you can still file a request for a criminal review, but it will be very difficult to prove your innocence after so much time. I know where the person who actually committed the theft is, and I have the testimony of the lady I was helping. That's a start. But I'll be honest with you. Prosecutors with solid careers don't like having their cases questioned. Michael Thompson, specifically, has a very good reputation. He was promoted to state attorney 2 years ago. The name hit Jessica like a punch in the stomach. Michael had gotten exactly what he wanted with her conviction. Professor, I need to get justice. Justice, yes, but be careful not to confuse that with revenge. Robert offered to help gather the evidence and documents needed for the criminal review. In the following months, Jessica divided herself between studies, work, and the investigation of her own case. The first important clue came through Patricia, the social worker who had never forgotten the case. She had kept in touch with Mrs. Margaret, who was now 75 years old and still lived at the same address. "Dear, when I heard you were studying law, I was so happy," the elderly woman said, welcoming Jessica into her small living room. "I always knew you were a good person." Mrs. Margaret agreed to give a formal testimony about what had happened that afternoon, But the most valuable information came when she mentioned something she hadn't told before. "You know, I had just left the bank when I bought those things at the market. I had withdrawn money to pay the rent. When I fell, my wallet flew away. You ran to get it and give it back to me. Any thief would have kept the money." It was more proof of Jessica's innocence, but it still wasn't enough. The big discovery came through Deborah, who had used her business contacts to discreetly investigate. Bobby Wong, the one truly responsible for the theft, now worked at a logistics company and had gotten into debt again with gambling. Jessica decided to approach him directly. The meeting took place at a bar near his workplace after hours. "Bobby, my name is Jessica Miller. I was convicted for the theft you committed at your father's market." The young man, now 26 years old, immediately turned pale. I don't know what you're talking about." "Your father already confessed to the social worker. Old Jim, who worked at the market, also confirmed it. I just want you to sign a statement telling the truth." Bobby began to break out in a cold sweat. He knew his life had been built on that lie. After Jessica was convicted, he got a job through one of his father's acquaintances, who always recommended him as a young man of good character, unlike those troublemakers you see around. "If I confess, I'll lose my job. My wife is pregnant." "And you think I didn't lose anything?" Jessica replied, controlling her anger. "I lost 2 years of my life in prison. I lost my son. I lost everything." Bobby lowered his head, ashamed. "How much do you want to forget this story?" The question made Jessica furious. "I don't want your money. I want justice." She stood up and placed a card on the table. "Think carefully about what's right. When you decide to do what must be done, call me." 2 weeks later, Bobby called. He was willing to sign the statement, but had one condition. He wanted guarantees that he wouldn't face criminal charges. Robert advised Jessica on how to proceed. The statement was signed at a notary's office with all the legal formalities. With the evidence gathered, they filed the petition for criminal review. The case was assigned to the same county where Jessica had been tried, but now with a different judge. The news of the review reached Michael Thompson's ears a week later. He was in his new office as a state attorney when he received a call from a colleague at the courthouse. "Michael, do you remember that case of the street girl you prosecuted about 5 years ago? She filed for criminal review." Michael felt a tightness in his chest. He remembered Jessica Miller perfectly and how she had shouted those words in the courtroom. What kind of evidence does she have? Victim's statement, confession from the real perpetrator, witnesses. It seems solid. For the first time in his career, Michael felt truly threatened. It wasn't just a matter of overturning a conviction. His reputation was at stake. If it were proven that he had convicted an innocent person, his career could be ruined. He decided to act. First, he tried to pressure the market owner to deny the accusations against his son. Mr. Wong, now 70 years old and in poor health, refused to lie again. "Prosecutor, I've carried this guilt for too long. My son has already confessed. I can no longer hide the truth." Michael then tried to discredit Patricia, the social worker, suggesting she had been influenced by Jessica. But Patricia had 25 years of an impeccable career and documents proving her independent investigation. The situation became even more complicated when Robert Williams, who had become Jessica's official attorney, began investigating other cases of Michael's. He discovered a troubling pattern. The prosecutor always sought quick convictions in cases involving low-income people, especially when he needed to improve his statistics. "Jessica," Robert said during a meeting in his office, "I think your case might just be the tip of the iceberg. They found at least 3 other suspicious cases: a man convicted for receiving stolen goods without conclusive evidence, a woman accused of abandoning a dependent under dubious circumstances, and a young man prosecuted for damaging public property based solely on the testimony of a witness who later turned out to have personal motivations." The first hearing for Jessica's criminal review was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in October. She woke up at 5 in the morning, took a shower, put on the suit Deborah had bought for her, and looked at herself in the mirror. "Today is the day," she said to herself. The courtroom was full. Besides the parties involved, there were journalists who had taken an interest in the case and law students following Robert Williams. Michael arrived 20 minutes before the hearing, accompanied by 2 private attorneys he had hired to defend him. When he saw Jessica, she was no longer the frightened young woman from 5 years ago. She was wearing makeup, her hair was done, and she radiated a confidence that unsettled him. Their eyes met for a moment. Jessica showed no anger or hatred, only a cold determination that made Michael remember the words she had shouted in the past. The hearing began with the testimony of Mrs. Margaret. At 75 years old, she climbed into the witness stand with difficulty, but her mind was clear and her memory perfect. "Mrs. Margaret," asked Robert, "can you tell us what happened that afternoon at the market?" "Yes, I can. I had just finished some shopping and was heading home when I slipped. I fell pretty hard, scattered everything on the ground. That young lady over there," she pointed to Jessica, "came running to help me. She even picked up my wallet that had flown away and gave it back to me without taking anything." "Are you sure she didn't take any items?" "Yes, I am. She was only helping me gather my things when those men came shouting." Michael's attorney tried to question the elderly woman's memory due to her age, but she remained firm and consistent in all details. The next testimony was from Bobby Wong. He stepped up to the stand visibly nervous, constantly looking at his father, who was in the audience. "Mr. Bobby," said Robert, "were you present at the market on the day of the alleged theft?" "I was." "Can you tell us what really happened?" Bobby took a deep breath before answering. "I had taken some items from the stock to sell and get some money. I owed some guys from gambling. When I saw that commotion with the lady who fell, I thought it was a good opportunity to shift the focus away from me." "Did you accuse Jessica Miller knowing she was innocent?" "Yes. I knew she hadn't done anything. She was just helping the lady." The murmur in the courtroom was immediate. Michael felt sweat trickle down his back as he watched his case crumble before his eyes. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing, Patricia was the third witness. She talked about her subsequent investigation and all the evidence she had gathered proving Jessica's innocence. "Attorney Patricia," asked Michael's attorney during cross-examination, "why didn't you bring this information to the authorities at the time?" "I tried. I reached out to Prosecutor Michael Thompson, but he had been transferred. I tried to reopen the case through other channels, but I encountered a lot of bureaucratic resistance. Don't you find it strange that all this evidence has appeared just now, when my client has graduated from law school?" Patricia looked directly at the attorney. "Counselor, with all due respect, I have been trying to correct this injustice for 5 years. What I find strange is questioning why a person would fight to prove their own innocence." The response drew applause from the audience, which was quickly silenced by the judge. Finally, it was Jessica's turn to testify. She stepped up to the witness stand with firm steps, looking directly at Michael before sitting down. "Jessica," began Robert, "can you tell us your version of the events?" Jessica took a deep breath and began recounting that afternoon that changed her life. She spoke about how she was walking down the street when she saw Mrs. Margaret fall, about how she ran to help her, about the confusion with the security guards. "At no point did you take any products from the market?" "No. I was only helping Mrs. Margaret gather her things." During cross-examination, Michael's lawyer tried to attack Jessica's character, mentioning her life on the streets and questioning her credibility. "Miss Jessica, you were living on the streets at the time of the events, correct?" "Yes." "And had you been involved in minor offenses before?" Robert stood up immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. The witness has no criminal record." "Sustained," said the judge. "The lawyer must stick to the facts of the case." But the lawyer insisted, "Miss, isn't it true that you had motivations to hold a grudge against the district attorney's office and are now trying to get revenge?" Jessica looked directly at Michael before answering. "Attorney, I spent 5 years of my life fighting to get here. It wasn't easy. I lost things I'll never be able to get back. But I'm not here for revenge. I'm here for justice, because other people might be going through what I went through." The answer echoed through the courtroom. Several people in the audience were visibly emotional. The judge ended the hearing and scheduled the sentencing for the following week. When everyone was leaving, Michael approached Jessica in the courthouse corridors. "Jessica, can I talk to you for a minute?" Robert tried to intervene, but she signaled for him to wait. "Listen," said Michael, lowering his voice. "I know I made mistakes in your case. How about we talk about a way to resolve this without so much noise?" "What kind of resolution?" asked Jessica. "Well, you must have lawyer expenses, lost time. I can compensate you financially." Jessica looked at him with an expression he couldn't decipher. "Prosecutor, do you really think this is about money? Then what is it about? It's about all the other people you may have done the same thing to. It's about making sure this doesn't happen again." Michael felt a chill. She knew about the other cases. "Look, I always acted within the law." "You acted within the law when you hid the confession of the real culprit? When you threatened the market owner not to tell the truth?" Michael's eyes widened. How did she know about that? "You can't prove any of that." "I may not be able to prove it now, but I have time, and now I know how to use the law to my advantage." She turned to leave, but stopped and looked back. "Oh, and prosecutor, remember what I said that day in court?" Michael swallowed hard. "I said you would regret it. And you will." A week later, the judge delivered the sentence. The criminal review was accepted, and Jessica was declared innocent of all charges. Furthermore, the judge ordered that the case be sent to the district attorney's office's internal affairs to investigate Michael's conduct during the original process. The news reverberated in the local press. Newspapers published stories about the young woman who had studied law to prove her own innocence. Radio programs discussed the case, and social media spread the story. Deborah was radiant with the outcome. She had followed Jessica's entire journey and felt like a proud mother. "Dear," she said during the celebratory lunch, "now you can move on with your life. You can get married, have children, be happy." "I'm not done yet, Deborah," replied Jessica. "I need to find my son, and I need to make sure Michael doesn't do this to anyone else." The search for Ethan became Jessica's new obsession. Patricia helped her navigate the adoption bureaucracy, but the adoptive parents had moved 3 times since taking the boy. Finally, through a private investigator recommended by Robert, they discovered that Ethan, now 7 years old, lived with his adoptive parents in a small town outside Chicago. The couple, Brian and Amanda Parker, were university professors who couldn't have children. The first meeting was set up in a public park, with a psychologist specializing in family reunification present. Jessica was extremely nervous. It had been 7 years without seeing the son she had held in her arms for only 3 days. Ethan was a bright boy with dark hair and curious eyes. When Patricia introduced her as a special person who wanted to meet him, he asked, "Are you my real mum?" The question hit Jessica like a bolt of lightning. She knelt down to be at the boy's eye level and replied, "I'm the woman who brought you into this world, but your parents are Brian and Amanda, who have taken care of you all these years." "Why couldn't you take care of me?" "Because some bad people wouldn't let me. But now I've proven they were wrong." Ethan studied her carefully before asking, "Are you going to want to take me away?" "No, my love. I just wanted to meet you and know if you're happy." "I am happy, but I also wanted to meet you." The meeting lasted 2 hours. Ethan talked about school, his friends, the dog he had at home. Jessica listened to every word as if it were the most important thing in the world. When it was time to say goodbye, Ethan asked, "Can I see you again?" "If your parents allow it, yes." Brian and Amanda, who had been observing the meeting from a distance, approached. They were good-natured people who truly loved Ethan as their son. "Jessica," said Amanda, "we know your story from the newspapers. You're a courageous woman." "Thank you for taking good care of him," replied Jessica. "You gave him what I couldn't." "We want you to be part of his life," said Brian. "Not as a threat, but as extended family." Jessica accepted the proposal. She would see Ethan once a month, always with his adoptive parents present. It wasn't the motherhood she had dreamed of, but it was a way to be present in her son's life. Meanwhile, the investigation into Michael Thompson was progressing. The Internal Affairs Division of the prosecutor's office had found irregularities in at least 5 cases he had handled. 3 of the victims had already contacted lawyers to request criminal reviews. Michael was desperate. His career, which he had built so carefully, was crumbling. His wife was threatening to file for divorce, and his teenage children were being bullied at school because of the case's publicity. In a desperate attempt to save his reputation, he decided to attack Jessica publicly. He gave an interview to a local television program claiming he was being victimized by a witch hunt, orchestrated by radical elements who want to discredit the prosecutor's office. "This young woman," he said during the interview, "has constructed a victim narrative to promote herself. She was convicted based on solid evidence, and now she's using the media to get revenge." "But doesn't the evidence presented in the criminal review prove her innocence?" asked the host. "Evidence can be fabricated, especially after so much time. It's very convenient that all these witnesses have appeared just now." The interview backfired. The next day, Mrs. Margaret, Bobby Wong, and several market employees gave interviews refuting Michael's accusations. Public opinion swung completely to Jessica's side. Robert advised Jessica not to publicly counter the accusations. Instead, they focused on gathering more evidence about Michael's misconduct throughout his career. The most shocking discovery came from a former employee of the district attorney's office who had retired and decided to speak up. He revealed that Michael had a habit of pressuring witnesses and hiding evidence that could hurt his conviction statistics. "He was obsessed with numbers," the former employee told Robert. "He always said every acquittal was a point off his record. He even celebrated when he got convictions in tough cases." With this information, Robert filed a formal complaint against Michael with the Ethics Board, asking not only for his administrative punishment, but also for a review of all the cases he had handled over the past 10 years. The pressure on Michael became unbearable. His superiors called him in for a meeting and suggested he apply for early retirement to avoid a more severe disciplinary process. "Michael," said the Attorney General, "you have a 25-year career. You can retire with dignity and avoid a permanent stain on your record." "But I always acted within the law," protested Michael. "The law isn't just what's written on paper. It's about ethics, about seeking the truth, about protecting the innocent. And you failed in those aspects." Michael left the meeting knowing his career was over. That night at home, he looked at the photos on the wall, documenting his professional successes. Trophies, plaques of recognition, pictures with officials. Everything seemed empty now. It was then he remembered Jessica's words in the courtroom. "You're going to regret this." She was right. He did regret it. Not just for convicting an innocent person, but for the entire philosophy that had guided his career. The obsession with numbers, with promotion, with recognition. He had lost sight of the real purpose of his profession. He picked up the phone and called Robert Williams. "Attorney Robert, this is Michael Thompson. I'd like to schedule a conversation with your client." "What for?" "To ask for forgiveness." The meeting was set for a Friday afternoon at Robert's office. Jessica arrived first, accompanied by Deborah, who insisted on being there for moral support. When Michael entered, Jessica barely recognized him. The proud, confident man from 5 years ago had been replaced by someone who seemed to have aged 10 years. His hair was gray, his shoulders were hunched, and there was a deep sadness in his eyes. "Jessica," he said, sitting down across from her, "I know nothing I say can undo the harm I caused you, but I need you to know that I deeply regret everything." Jessica watched him silently before responding. "Do you regret it because you were caught or because you truly understand what you did wrong?" "I regret it because I destroyed an innocent person's life, because I took away your freedom, separated you from your son, caused years of suffering, all because of my personal ambition." "And the other people? The other cases?" Michael lowered his head. "I'm reviewing all my cases. I've already identified at least 4 situations where I may have acted inappropriately. I will cooperate with the reviews and do everything in my power to correct the mistakes." "Why?" asked Jessica. "Because it's the right thing to do. Because I need to try to redeem at least some of the harm I caused." Jessica was silent for a few minutes, processing Michael's words. Finally, she asked, "Do you have children?" "Yes, 2 teenagers. How are they handling all this?" Michael sighed deeply. My daughter hasn't spoken to me in 2 weeks. My son said he's ashamed to have my last name. My wife is thinking about filing for divorce. Now you know what it's like to lose everything because of an injustice." The comparison hit Michael right in the heart. He was experiencing firsthand a small fraction of what he had caused Jessica. "I forgive you," said Jessica, surprising everyone in the room. "Why?" asked Michael, genuinely shocked. "Because holding on to resentment only hurts the one who holds it. Because forgiving doesn't mean forgetting or accepting what was done. It means choosing not to let the hurt continue controlling my life." Michael began to cry. They were tears of relief, but also of shame and regret. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't deserve your forgiveness, but thank you. You don't forgive for those who deserve it. You forgive to set yourself free." Michael publicly committed to cooperating with all reviews of his cases. He resigned from his position before being formally punished and offered to testify in favor of the victims of his improper decisions. 2 years later, Jessica graduated from law school with honors. Her thesis was on judicial errors and prosecutorial responsibility, and it became an academic reference on the subject. Deborah offered resources for her to open her own office, specializing in defending people in socially vulnerable situations. The chosen name was Miller Legal Aid, using her surname as a way to honor her own journey. The first case she accepted was that of a 50-year-old woman who had been convicted of abandoning a dependent under circumstances similar to hers. It was one of the cases Michael had identified as problematic. "Mrs. Maria," said Jessica during the first consultation, "I know exactly what you're going through, and I promise we will fight until we achieve justice." The woman, who had lost custody of her children because of the conviction, began to cry with relief upon seeing that finally someone believed her. Jessica's office quickly gained a reputation. She didn't charge fees from clients without financial means and funded the cases through donations from business people like Deborah and symbolic fees from clients in better economic situations. Ethan, now 9 years old, visited the office once a month. He had become a boy proud of his biological mother and always told his school friends about the lawyer who fought to prove she was innocent. "Mom, Jessica," he said during one of these visits, "when I grow up, can I work with you?" "Of course, my love. But first you need to study hard and choose what you really want to be. I want to help people like you help." Patricia, the social worker who had been crucial to discovering the truth, became a frequent collaborator with the office. She identified suspicious cases and referred them to Jessica. "You know," said Patricia during lunch, "sometimes I think everything happened for a reason. Your injustice ended up saving other people." "I wish it hadn't happened," replied Jessica, "but since it did, at least I'm managing to turn the pain into something useful." Robert Williams became an unofficial mentor to Jessica. He introduced her to other experienced lawyers and helped her navigate the more complex aspects of legal practice. "Jessica," he said during one of these conversations, "you've become exactly the type of professional the law needs. Someone who understands that the law should serve justice, not personal interests." 3 years after her graduation, Jessica received an unexpected invitation. The state governor wanted to appoint her to a substitute judge position. "It's a great opportunity," said Deborah when they learned of the proposal. "You could do a lot of good for the judicial system." Jessica was tempted but decided to refuse. "My place is here, defending those in need. If I become a judge, I'll have to be impartial. As a lawyer, I can choose to fight for the underdog." Her decision was widely respected, and she continued building her career as a human rights defender. Michael, on the other hand, was trying to rebuild his life. He had become an insurance salesman and dedicated his free time to volunteer work with organizations that helped former inmates reintegrate into society. His wife didn't ask for a divorce, but imposed strict conditions for reconciliation. He would have to go to therapy, work jobs that kept him away from the judicial system, and dedicate at least 10 hours a week to social work. "It's the least you can do to try to make up for the harm you caused," she said. Michael's children took longer to forgive him. His daughter, especially, was traumatized to discover that the father she admired had ruined the lives of innocent people. "Dad," she said during a difficult conversation, How could you do that to that young woman? She was almost my age when she was arrested. Daughter, I was so focused on my career that I forgot that every case had a real person behind it. Someone with dreams, fears, family. I turned people into numbers. And now? Now I'm trying to be a better person. I can't undo what I did, but I can try not to repeat the mistakes. 5 years after the criminal review, Jessica was invited to give a lecture at the university where she had graduated. The topic was Ethics in Criminal Law, and the audience was packed with students, teachers, and professionals in the field. You who are graduating from law school, she said during the lecture, will have enormous power in your hands. The power to change lives, to do justice, to protect the innocent. But you will also have the power to destroy people if you misuse the law. A student raised his hand. Attorney Jessica, how can we avoid making the same mistakes the prosecutor made in your case? Always remember that every case is about a real person, not about statistics, not about promotions, not about personal recognition. It's about human life. And when in doubt, always choose the side of justice, even if it means admitting mistakes or giving up personal advantages. After the lecture, a young student approached her. Attorney, I read about your case in the newspapers. Don't you feel angry about losing so many years? I did feel angry, yes. But I learned that anger is like poison. It hurts the one who carries it more than the one who did wrong. I chose to turn the pain into fuel to help other people. And if you met that prosecutor on the street today? I do meet him. We've talked a few times. He's trying to redeem himself, and I believe people can change. The student was surprised by the answer. You really forgave him? I did. Not for him, but for myself. Because I wanted to free myself from the burden of resentment and use my energy for constructive things. Around that same time, Ethan turned 10. Jessica organized a surprise party for him, with the help of Brian and Amanda. It was the first time the adoptive parents allowed her to actively participate in their son's celebration. During the party, Ethan made a special request. Mom Jessica, can you tell me the story of how you fought to prove you hadn't done anything wrong? Jessica looked at Brian and Amanda, who nodded in approval. It's a sad story, Ethan. Are you sure you want to hear it? Yes. I want to understand why you're so strong. Jessica told the story in a way adapted to his age, focusing on the aspects of overcoming and justice, omitting the more painful details. And in the end, asked Ethan, was the bad man punished? Yes, he was. But you know what's more important? He learned that he was wrong and is trying to be a better person. And you? Were you happy when he was punished? At first I thought I would be, but when it happened, I only felt relief. Relief because the truth had finally come out and other people wouldn't have to go through what I went through. Ethan thought for a few seconds before saying, I'm proud of you, Mom Jessica. The boy's words touched Jessica deeply. It was as if all the years of struggle and suffering finally made sense. Brian approached them. Jessica, Amanda and I were talking. How about Ethan spending his January vacation with you? Just the two of you for a week. It was more than Jessica had ever dreamed of, a whole week with her son, getting to know him better, creating memories that would last forever. Ethan, would you like that? She asked. Very much. Can I see your office? Can I see where you work? Of course, and I can introduce you to some people you'll enjoy meeting. During the vacation, Ethan met Mrs. Margaret, who was now 78 years old, but still sharp and active. The elderly woman was moved to meet Jessica's son. Young man, she said, offering homemade sweets, your mother is a hero. She fought against everything and everyone to prove the truth. I know, replied Ethan proudly. She told me the story. And you? What do you want to be when you grow up? I want to help people like she helps. Mrs. Margaret smiled and looked at Jessica. This boy will go far. He has his heart in the right place, just like his mother. Ethan also met Patricia, who became like a grandmother to him during that week. She told stories about her work as a social worker and about how she had helped Jessica discover the truth. Aunt Patricia, asked Ethan, why did you help my mother, even when everyone said she was guilty? Because sometimes we need to believe in people, even when the evidence seems to be against them. Your mother had something in her eyes that told me she was speaking the truth. On the last day of the vacation, Ethan asked to visit the courthouse where everything had happened. Jessica hesitated, but decided to take him. "Was it here that you yelled at the prosecutor?" asked Ethan, looking at the defendant's bench. "It was." "And were you scared?" "Very scared, but also very angry and very determined that the truth would come out one day." Ethan walked through the courthouse, observing every detail. "Mom, Jessica, do you think if I study hard, I could be a judge one day?" "You can be whatever you want, my love. But if you become a judge, always remember to listen to everyone carefully and seek the truth." "I'll remember." 2 years later, Jessica received a call that would change her life again. It was the State Attorney General offering her a position as a state prosecutor. "Attorney Jessica," he said, "we know about your journey and believe you would be an excellent addition to the district attorney's office, a person with your experience and commitment to social justice." This time, Jessica was more tempted. As a prosecutor, she could work to reform the system from within, ensuring that other cases like hers wouldn't happen. She talked with Deborah, Robert, and even with Ethan before making the decision. "My love," she said to Ethan during lunch, "Mom is thinking about accepting a new job. It would be like being a prosecutor, but on the side of justice." "Will you not have your office anymore?" "I'll have to close it." Ethan thought for a few seconds. "But the people you help at the office, who will help them?" Ethan's question was decisive. Jessica realized that her place was truly in legal aid, directly defending those who needed it most. "Thank you," she said to the Attorney General when she called to decline. "But my mission is different." At 30 years old, Jessica had become one of the most respected lawyers in the field of human rights in Chicago. Her office had grown and now employed 5 lawyers and 3 social workers. She had also found love. She met Mark, a family doctor who worked in underserved communities, during a case involving medical malpractice at a public hospital. They had a simple wedding ceremony, with Ethan as the ring bearer and Mrs. Margaret as the matron of honor. "You're going to be a wonderful wife," Deborah said during the reception. "Tyler is a lucky man." "I'm the lucky one," Jessica replied. "I found someone who understands my mission and supports me." Ethan, now 12 years old, spent half his vacations with Jessica and Tyler. He had become a smart and inquisitive preteen, always interested in social justice issues. "Mom, Jessica," he said during a conversation, "don't you think about having more children?" "I do, actually. Would you like to have a brother or sister?" "I'd like that very much, but I'll always be the first, right?" "Always," Jessica assured him, hugging her son. Jessica's law office had become a model for other lawyers interested in legal aid work. She received invitations to speak at universities across the country and had written a book about her experience, titled "From Injustice to Justice, A Journey of Resilience." The book became a bestseller and generated proceeds that she fully invested in social projects aimed at at-risk youth. During the book launch, Michael showed up at the bookstore. He had learned about the event through a newspaper and decided to attend. "Jessica," he said, approaching after the signing session ended, "congratulations on the book. I read some excerpts online. It's an inspiring story." "Thank you, Michael. How are you?" "Better. Still trying to make up for past mistakes, but better." "And your family?" "My wife forgave me. The kids did too after a long time. We're rebuilding our relationship." "I'm happy for you." Michael hesitated before asking the next question. "Jessica, do you think people can really change?" "I believe they can. But real change is hard. It requires facing your mistakes, taking responsibility, and working every day to be better." "And do you think I've changed?" Jessica studied him for a few seconds. "I think you're on the right path. The Michael I knew in court would never have come here today. He would never have admitted his mistakes publicly. Thank you, that means a lot coming from you." When Michael walked away, Tyler approached Jessica. "How do you feel seeing him?" "I don't feel anger. I don't feel fear. I feel hope. Hope that people can really change when they face the consequences of their actions." 5 years later, Ethan was in high school and had already decided he wanted to study law. Jessica was moved, but also worried. "My love, are you sure? Law can be a very heavy profession." "I'm sure. I want to follow your example." "Then promise me one thing. If one day you become a prosecutor or a judge, always remember that every person who comes before you is someone with dreams, fears, a family. Someone who deserves to be treated with dignity." "I promise." Jessica had become a national reference in human rights law. Her office had expanded to other cities, always maintaining the same principle, providing free services to those who couldn't afford it and using resources from better-off clients to fund social causes. In one of these expansions, she decided to open a branch in Washington, D.C. to work with federal agencies. It was there that she met Betty Anderson, a 70-year-old woman who had been a victim of a mistake similar to hers 20 years earlier. "Attorney Jessica," the elderly woman said during the first consultation, "no one ever believed me. They said I was an old liar trying to get out of trouble. Mrs. Betty Anderson, now someone believes you, and we will fight to prove your innocence." The case was complex and lengthy, but Jessica managed to overturn the conviction. Betty Anderson cried when she heard the decision. "Attorney, I can leave this life in peace. After 20 years, my name is finally cleared." "Mrs. Betty Anderson, you still have many years ahead of you, and now you can live those years with dignity." Cases like Betty Anderson's became Jessica Miller's specialty. She had developed a specific methodology to investigate and overturn wrongful convictions, especially those involving people with low income and limited education. Her work gained international attention. She was invited to speak at American and European universities about judicial reform and human rights. During a lecture at Harvard University, a student asked, "Professor Jessica, what is the greatest lesson from your experience?" "That justice isn't automatic. It must be pursued, earned, defended every day, and that sometimes injustice, as painful as it may be, can become the fuel to do greater good." At 35, Jessica was invited by the federal government to coordinate a national commission to review cases suspected of wrongful convictions. It was the opportunity to apply her experience on a national scale. "It's a chance to impact thousands of lives," said Mark when she told him about the invitation. "But it means leaving the office, leaving direct contact with the people I need to help. For a while. But imagine how many other people you can help if you manage to change the system as a whole." Ethan, now in his senior year of high school, also encouraged her. "Mom Jessica, you always taught me that we have to think about the greater good. I think this is your chance to do that." Jessica accepted the position. As the Commission's coordinator, she gained access to national data on judicial errors. What she discovered shocked her. There were hundreds of suspicious cases scattered across the country, many involving the same pattern that had characterized her own conviction. "We need to create a national protocol," she said during the Commission's first meeting. "Clear guidelines for prosecutors and judges, verification mechanisms, channels for reporting irregularities." The Commission's work took 3 years. In the end, over 200 cases of possibly wrongful convictions were identified. Of these, 43 were overturned, including those of people who had spent decades in prison. One of the stories that most struck Jessica was that of Terrence Washington, a 60-year-old black man who had been convicted of a rape he didn't commit when he was 25. He spent 35 years in prison until DNA tests proved his innocence. "Dr. Terrence Washington," said Jessica when he was freed. He had earned a law degree in prison. "I am so sorry for all the suffering you went through. Attorney Jessica, you gave me back my dignity. Now I can die in peace. You will live much longer, and I hope you use your experience to help others." Terrence Washington became a collaborator for the Commission, using his own story to identify flaws in the judicial system. During the 3 years of work on the Commission, Jessica and Mark had 2 children, Emily Grace and William. Ethan, now a law student in college, became a caring and protective older brother. "Mom," said Ethan during a family dinner, "do you think Emily and William will want to pursue a legal career too?" "They will choose what they want. The important thing is that they are good people who care about others, like you taught me, like you learned on your own. You always had a good heart, Ethan. When the commission's work ended, Jessica returned to her office in Chicago. But now she had a national perspective and a network of contacts that allowed her to work on cases from all over the country. It was at this time that she received an unexpected phone call. Michael wanted to set up a meeting. "Jessica, I know it might seem strange, but I would like to talk to you about a project." They met at a cafe in downtown Chicago. Michael, now 52 years old, had gained a little weight, and his hair was completely gray. "Jessica, I've been following your work on the National Commission. It's impressive how you've turned your personal experience into something that benefits the entire country." "Thank you, but I imagine you didn't ask to meet just to compliment me." "No, I want to propose a partnership." Jessica looked at him with surprise. "What kind of partnership?" "I'd like to work with you. Use my experience as a former prosecutor to identify patterns that lead to wrongful convictions. Help train new prosecutors so they don't make the same mistakes I made." The proposal took Jessica by surprise. She had never imagined working with Michael. "Why do you want to do this?" "Because I need to. Because it's the only way I've found to truly redeem myself. Selling insurance is paying my bills, but it's not healing my soul." Jessica thought about the proposal for several days. She spoke with Mark, with Ethan, with Deborah, and with Robert before giving an answer. "Michael," she said when she called back, "I accept your proposal, but with a few conditions." "What are they?" "First, you'll work as a volunteer, no salary or benefits. Second, you'll have to tell your story publicly, in lectures and seminars. Third, any sign that you're using this to rebuild your political career and the partnership ends. I accept all the conditions." The partnership between Jessica and Michael caused initial controversy. Many of Jessica's colleagues questioned the decision to work with someone who had caused so much harm. "Jessica," said a friend who was an attorney, "are you sure you're not being naive? This man might just be trying to clean up his image." "Maybe. But if he's really changed, he can help prevent other prosecutors from making the same mistakes. And if he hasn't changed, I'll find out quickly." The first few months of working together were tense. Michael still carried traces of arrogance and had difficulty accepting criticism. But gradually he adapted to his new role. Their first joint lecture was at a law school in Atlanta. Jessica spoke about her experience as a victim, and Michael told how he had built a career based on questionable methods. "Students," said Michael during his part of the presentation, "you're going to have enormous power when you graduate, the power to change lives. I used that power wrongly, focusing on my personal interests instead of seeking justice. Don't make the same mistake." A student raised his hand. "Professor Michael, how can we be sure we won't become corrupt like you did?" The question was direct and painful. Michael took a deep breath before answering, "You can't be sure. The temptation will always be there. What you can do is constantly remember why you chose law. If it was to do justice, keep that purpose always in mind. If it was for money or power, maybe it's better to change professions now." The answer generated an uncomfortable silence, but also a reluctant respect. The students realized they were facing someone who had hit rock bottom and was genuinely trying to redeem himself. Over the next 2 years, Jessica and Michael traveled across the country giving lectures and training. They developed a continuing education program for prosecutors, focusing on ethics and preventing judicial errors. "You know," said Michael during a trip back from New Orleans, "working with you I understood the difference between justice and revenge." "How so?" "You had every reason to want to destroy me. You could have used your influence to finish me. But instead, you gave me the opportunity to try to correct my mistakes. Michael, destroying you wouldn't bring my son back or undo the years I lost. But using you to prevent others from going through the same thing, that makes sense." The conversation marked a shift in their dynamic. Michael stopped seeing himself as someone doing a favor and began to understand he was fulfilling a moral obligation. Ethan graduated from law school at 22 with a specialization in criminal law. During the graduation ceremony, he made sure to mention Jessica in his speech as the class representative. "I want to dedicate my graduation to the woman who taught me that the law is only worthwhile when used to protect the weakest. My mother, Jessica Miller, showed me that true strength isn't about winning at any cost, but about fighting for justice even when all seems lost. The audience rose in applause. Jessica cried with emotion, remembering when she held that baby in her arms in the prison infirmary, promising she would give him a better life. After graduation, Ethan decided to specialize in human rights. He wanted to follow in Jessica's footsteps, but find his own path. "Mom, I've been thinking about working with children's rights, specifically with problematic adoption situations. It's an important area, and you have a unique perspective being adopted." "Exactly. I want to help families going through situations like ours." Emily Grace and William, now 5 and 4 years old respectively, grew up hearing stories about justice and human rights. Emily always said she wanted to help people like Mommy, while William dreamed of being a doctor like his father. "You can be whatever you want," Jessica would tell them. "The important thing is to be good people." At 40, Jessica decided to write a second book, focusing specifically on her work on the National Commission and the changes that had been implemented in the judicial system. The book, titled Justice for All Reforming a System, became required reading in several law schools and influenced public policies in various states. During the launch, a journalist asked, "Attorney Jessica, looking back, would you say it was worth going through everything you went through?" "I can't say it was worth it, because that suggests I would choose to go through it all again. I wouldn't choose to. But I can say I managed to turn something terrible into something useful, and that gives me peace." Michael, who was in the audience, was called to the stage to talk about the partnership. "Working with Jessica," he said, "taught me that redemption isn't something you achieve once, and that's it. It's something you have to work on every day. And that true forgiveness isn't about forgetting what happened, but using what happened to prevent it from happening again." 2 years later, Ethan opened his own office, specializing in child and adolescent rights. Jessica was his first client in a symbolic sense. She hired him to review all contracts and adoption procedures related to her own case, ensuring other families wouldn't go through the same bureaucratic difficulties. "Mom," said Ethan during a work meeting, "reviewing your documents, I realized how precarious the system was at the time. Today we have much better mechanisms to protect both children and biological families. It's good to know something has changed for the better." But there's still a lot of work to do. Ethan's office quickly became established. He developed a reputation for being meticulous, ethical, and committed to the well-being of children above all else. In one of his first major cases, he defended a young mother who had lost custody of her son due to a false accusation of neglect. The situation was similar to Jessica's in many ways. "Attorney Ethan," said the young woman during the first consultation, "no one believes me. Everyone thinks I'm a bad mother." "I believe you," replied Ethan, "and we will prove your innocence." The case took 8 months to resolve, but Ethan managed to gather evidence proving the accusation had been made out of revenge by the young woman's ex-partner. "Attorney Ethan," said the mother when she regained custody of her son, "how can I thank you for what you've done?" "By being a good mother to your son. That's the only thanks I need." When Ethan told Jessica about the case, she was moved. "My love, you're doing exactly what the world needs. Protecting families, caring for children. I learned from the best." Deborah, now 75 years old, remained active and proud of Jessica, as if she were her own daughter. She had become one of the main funders of the social projects developed by Jessica's network of offices. "Dear," she said during lunch, "you know I have no biological children. I want to leave everything to you and Ethan in my will. Deborah, you don't have to. I want to. You are my family, and I know you'll use the resources well to help people." Mrs. Margaret, now 82 years old, continued to be a constant presence in Jessica's life. She had become like a grandmother to Emily Grace and William, who loved visiting her and listening to her stories. "Grandma Margaret," asked Emily Grace during a visit, "why did you help my mom that day?" "Because it was the right thing to do, my child. When we see someone in need of help, we have to help. And if no one had helped? Oh, there's always someone with a good heart in the world. Sometimes it takes a while for them to appear, but there always is. Patricia, the social worker, had retired, but continued to volunteer with Jessica's projects. She had specialized in family reunification cases and become a national reference on the subject. "Jessica," she said during one of her visits to the office, "sometimes I think everything happened exactly as it should have." "How so?" "If you hadn't gone through all that you did, you wouldn't have become the person you are today, and hundreds of other people wouldn't have been helped. I wish there had been another way for things to happen. Me too. But since they did, it's good that you managed to turn everything into something positive." Jessica's work had expanded internationally. She became a UN consultant on judicial reform issues in developing countries and was invited to participate in global conferences on human rights. During a conference in Geneva, she met Gabriela Rodriguez, a young Colombian lawyer who had gone through a similar experience to hers. "Attorney Jessica," said Gabriela, "I've read your books. Your story gave me strength to keep fighting. And how is your situation now?" "I managed to prove my innocence last year. Now I'm setting up an organization in Bogotá to help others. If you need help or guidance, you can reach out to me." These international connections allowed Jessica to develop a global network of lawyers specializing in overturning wrongful convictions. The exchange of experiences and methodologies benefited cases in various countries. During one of her trips, she received an urgent call from Ethan. "Mum, you need to come back to Chicago. Mrs. Margaret has been hospitalized." Jessica cancelled all her appointments and returned immediately. She found Mrs. Margaret in the ICU of a public hospital, conscious but fragile. "My daughter," said the elderly woman when she saw Jessica, "I'm so glad you came. How are you feeling?" "Tired, but happy. I've had a good life. I've helped good people like you." "You're going to be fine. The doctors said it's just a bad flu." "Jessica, even if I'm not, I want you to know I feel fulfilled. Seeing all that you've accomplished, seeing Ethan grow up, meeting your little ones, it was worth living until now." Mrs. Margaret recovered from this hospitalization, but it became clear that her health was deteriorating. Jessica began visiting her weekly, always bringing Emily, Grace, and William. "Grandma Margaret," said William during a visit, "when I grow up, can I be a doctor to take care of you?" "Oh, my dear grandson, by the time you grow up, I'll already be up in heaven watching over you in a different way." The simplicity and wisdom of the elderly woman continued to impress Jessica. Mrs. Margaret had been the first person to believe in her, to testify on her behalf, and she remained a source of strength and inspiration. Michael, in turn, had found his place in the world. The joint work with Jessica had expanded, and they now coordinated a national program to prevent judicial errors. "Jessica," he said during a meeting, "I want you to know that these last 5 years have been the most meaningful of my life." "Why?" "Because I'm finally using my experience to do good in the world. Before, I used the law to feed my ego. Now I use it to try to correct the mistakes I made." "And your family? How are they handling all this?" "Much better. My children respect me again. My wife says she finally met the man she married." "How so?" "She says the ambitious and arrogant man she knew wasn't my true personality. It was a distortion caused by power and professional pressure." The conversation made Jessica reflect on the complexity of human nature. People could change, but only when they truly faced the consequences of their actions. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you believe Jessica made the right decision by forgiving Michael? We would love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for your company. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other moving stories.